Coming to paperback and e-readers from SJS Direct, ISIS, House of Isis, the goddess next door takes on a hustling Hotep high priestess in Harlem in this Afrocentric ISIS series adventure. Pre-order ISIS, House of Isis on Amazon.com today. President Donald Trump fired his Secretary of State Rex Tillerson yesterday and appointed the CIA director to become the new Secretary of State. When I take a look at this Trump presidency, it has had a tremendous amount of turnover in the less than 1 year it has been in power. And in that less than 1 year of being in power, almost every member of the Trump cabinet has turned over, and there are many vacancies in the State Department right now. And when I take a real serious look at this Trump presidency, it reminds me a lot of a nonprofit. Now, I was working at the Strive East Harlem Employment Service as part of the AmeriCorps Vista program back in the year 2000. And everything that I see regarding this Trump presidency reminds me a lot of the chaos that I was dealing with working at the Strive East Harlem Employment Service. And when I was working at the Strive East Harlem Employment Service as part of that AmeriCorps Vista program, I saw firsthand a whole lot of turnover. And one of the reasons why we had a lot of turnover was due to the fact that there was no real leadership at Strive East Harlem Employment Service, and there was a grossly unqualified person in the role of the vice president supervising the day-to-day operations. Now, our vice president was this labor lawyer who knew nothing about nonprofits, but he was placed in this position because he had a Ivy League education from Cornell University and he had a degree in law from Yale University. But he didn't really know anything about job readiness, life in the inner city, or the struggles of people in the inner city. He really came off as aloof and disconnected, and he really didn't know how to work effectively with the people who were a part of that nonprofit in helping it maintain its operations to day or work together as a team. And over time, as I was working in Strive, things were coming to a head, and I just didn't know it. But the CEO of Strive decided to call everybody in for a meeting where he decided he was going to get upset regarding the lack of placements that was going to prevent them from meeting their goals. And what he did to try to let people know how dire the situation was really alienated people. So the CEO decides he's just not going to pay anyone and he's going to hold everybody's check because they're not meeting their goals. And he fired two individuals and he went into an emotional rant regarding the whole situation. And what happened after that was everyone at Strive got demoralized. And after people started getting demoralized, I saw many very good, talented people starting to put their resumes in other places and then go look for other jobs. Now, Strive had a serious problem with turnover for years, but this brought things to a serious head after the CEO decided he just wasn't going to pay anyone. He was going to hold everybody's check to send a message about what would happen to the program, but all he did was alienate many talented workers who were helping the program help place people who were considered unemployable, like ex-offenders, single mothers, high school dropouts, people who are in drug abuse recovery, and people who were considered unplaceable. Those people worked tirelessly and effortlessly to try to help the Strive Job Readiness Program and the participants of the program. But once he decided he wasn't going to pay them on time and he was just going to hold their checks out of malice, what happened is those people had no incentive to continue wanting to work passionately at a nonprofit where they were going to be paid less than they would in the private sector. So a lot of people at that time, when the economy was at a incredible boom, decided instead of working at this nonprofit to help many of these unemployable people or people considered unemployable, they were going to go back into the job market to go work for themselves. So that after he decided not to pay those people, what had happened is morale went down at Strive, and a lot of the more talented people wound up quitting working there after they got other positions. And I saw people leaving this organization, and these were good people. These were very talented people. These were people who were very passionate, and they really cared about the Strive program, but they had no incentive to stay working at that program after this happened. And many people said it was due to the lack of leadership there, and I could clearly see the lack of leadership from this vice president, and I really saw it when he took me to the lunch and told me I had no place in their organization, even after I stayed there and made efforts to try to shore up much of the damage. What I was doing at Strive after when I was seeing all these people leaving was trying to support them, but also trying to support the program by having a family member who was working at another nonprofit try to recruit people to try to fill in some of those positions so the program wouldn't fall completely apart, because their social services department lost their social services director and they lost their caseworker. And thanks to my family member, they were able to get a caseworker to come in. And this was something that I managed to try to help them do to help shore up their program. And I tried to help my family member tried to help place other people there, but I was told I had no place in their organization, even though was trying to help them just from that AmeriCorps Vista volunteer position. I was showing how passionate I was to help their program, but this is how I was treated by their vice president. And as I stayed on at Strive, because I was kind of stuck there, because in order to stay in AmeriCorps Vista, you have to stay there the whole year in order to get either the stipend or the college money. I had to stay there the entire year. I watched the situation deteriorate tremendously, as instead of trying to recruit qualified African Americans to help inner city people, they then brought in white people, and then those white people decided they wanted to bring in other white people, and the entire program completely collapsed as more African Americans who were working at this program, which was designed to help African Americans, decided to leave. And everything was starting to get tense there. And it was just sad to watch 95% of a functioning nonprofit's employees leave in that time. And what I saw there is what I'm seeing with this Trump presidency. Now, when I take a look at this Trump presidency, it's running just like a nonprofit, in that you have employees who are going in and out like a revolving door. You have people turning over left and right. And it looks like to me the morale there is starting to become demoralized, because when you have an organization where there is a lot of turnover, there's a clear sign that there is a problem with the leadership. And when you have a leader there who has no focus, no direction, and no idea of where they want to go, you clearly see it by the way the employees behave. And when I take a look at the way the employees in the Trump presidency are behaving, they show me that the commander in chief is not taking command of his White House. And his White House is in complete disarray, the way Strive was in complete disarray in the year 2000. When I take a look at the Trump presidency, I don't see a leader who is focusing on trying to make the country great again. I see a man who is completely in over his head and has no idea of what to do, just like that labor lawyer Strive hired to be its vice president, a man who was too caught up in trying to be this big shot Negro instead of trying to be a leader of people. He wanted to be this big man, but he didn't know that part of being a leader is coming down to the people and working with them on their level and supporting them on their level and understanding their problems on their level. Leaders are not above people, leaders stand with their people. And this was something he didn't understand, and he wound up alienating so many people who wanted to work with them. And that was one of the big problems at Strive related to their leadership. And it was the big problem with the Trump presidency, is that Donald Trump is completely disconnected from the world. And you can clearly see that from his proposals like when he talked about with food stamps giving people boxes of food like Blue Apron, not understanding that this would be incredibly expensive and it would not stop any fraud. In fact, what would happen is instead of people stealing money, what they're going to do is steal boxes of food. So it was no way to stop things except it was going to do is cost more money because you would have to warehouse all this food. But then you would still have thefts because people would still be stealing food. So it's not going to solve anything and it's not going to change anything. But it showed that Donald Trump was completely out of touch regarding the subject of food stamps because he was coming at it from a rich white male's perspective. And from a rich white male's perspective, they often see welfare and food stamps as a black problem and something that quote unquote welfare queens took advantage of, when in actuality, food stamps was a program designed in the 1930s because white males were walking out on their families and leaving their families to, to suffer because he just couldn't deal with the fact that he was unemployed during the Depression. That was the core reason why food stamps was started, in addition to so many children being born with birth defects and rickets due to a lack of nutrition. That was the core reason that food stamps was started. But Donald Trump and many racists believe welfare and food stamps is just being there to take care of black people. And they were going to passive aggressively drive the black people off by just giving them food. And what they didn't understand is that a lot of people who are white were the ones who were the primary recipients of food stamps, and many of our armed services, our military, they use food stamps to get by because their military wages are lower than those wages people get in the private sector. Moreover, those who work in organizations like the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps, they also qualify for food stamps. But your Donald Trump, again, does not have the experience in government and public administration to understand these concepts. If you understand public administration and you understand how municipal governments work, you understand that food stamps not only serve people in the inner city, but they service people all across the country, from rural cities to people who live in high-end areas. People like maids and butlers who get low wages, they also qualify for food stamps. So there's a large spectrum of people who qualify for food stamps. But your President Donald Trump didn't understand it. Just like he didn't understand regarding the whole mass shootings, that mass shootings are not a result of violent video games. Your Donald Trump there was talking to executives in the video game industry about violent video games, when violent video games were a minimal percentage of what was behind the cause of many mass shooters. And when we take a look at your Donald Trump, we see an individual, again, who is completely clueless as regarding running a public administration and running a government. However, he believes that his ideas are the best ideas, even though he's supposed to work with his cabinet towards coming up with a solution for the entire country. Instead, he's just thinking about how he feels regarding things, because this is one of the Achilles heels of the Trump presidency, is that Donald Trump is an emotional individual and he does things based on emotion without very little critical thinking. And when it comes down to President Trump, he does not critically think about anything, because when we take a look at the way he's handled North Korea, he has not handled North Korea in a constructive and diplomatic fashion. He comes out here talking about how Kim Jong-un is the rocket man and continuing to go into a verbal back and forth instead of trying to handle things in a diplomatic situation. Now he wants to meet with the North Korean leader, and he wants to meet with him without counsel of a Secretary of State and a State Department. That's a very dangerous situation for a president to be in, because you need your diplomatic staff in place before you go to meet with a world leader to let you know what a situation is in a country and where things are going in a country, and to be able to negotiate constructively with an individual. Unfortunately, when it comes down to President Donald Trump, he clearly shows us that he has no leadership ability, and he has no critical thinking and no strategic planning, and everything he does is off the top of his head, and everything is based on his feelings. In some ways, he reminds me of a black woman in the way that he behaves. And when I take a look at the way he behaves, again, it reminds me a lot of the way those guys at Strive at the nonprofit were behaving. And that type of approach, again, leads to a lot of chaos because it shows us that in both cases, none of these men know how to lead. Instead, they are just doing things based on their feelings. And that's not the way anyone should want their country to be led. When you have a country, you need a leader in place who is willing to set a course for the country, set a direction for the country, and has a plan for where they want to go with the country. With the last couple of presidents, I have not seen any sort of course or direction for the country. I see these presidents literally coasting instead of setting a course for the country. And while they make big speeches and get people riled up emotionally, they have no long term plans for where they want to see the country go in the 8 years that they are president. When I take a look at Donald Trump, I see a person who knows how to make a big rally and talk about how he wants to make America great again, but I don't see any concrete plans on how he hopes to make the country great. When I take a look at that tax cut he passed, I saw a lot of giveaways for rich people, but I did not see a long term plan towards building new businesses, building new infrastructure. All I saw was a plan based on emotion and a plan to appease rich people and a plan that would get rid of what people considered the mandatory provision for Obamacare, and that was done in a passive aggressive fashion. And when I take a look at that bill, it reminds me a lot of Obamacare, a bill that was forced through by Barack Obama and the Democratic Congress. And I look at that bill, and that bill did damage to America's economy and literally stalled it for 8 years because employers just couldn't afford to hire people because they were stuck with these mandatory health care bills that they would have to pay for a new hire. And when I look at this tax cut bill, all it's going to do, as I see it, is lead to a lot of inflation, and it's going to lead to the economy overheating and then eventually collapsing because the rich are going to take all their money and they're going to then, after they get all their money, go overseas, and then that's going to lead to the economy overheating and then collapsing. So I take a look at the big picture as related to Donald Trump and the Republican Congress majority, and it is no different than Barack Obama. But the operation of Trump's cabinet reminds me a lot of a nonprofit, and in a nonprofit, the employees start out with passion, but when they see that the leaders there have no real direction, no real focus, they become demoralized, and then eventually they wind up turning over. And then as the nonprofit goes on, it becomes a revolving door. They start having funding issues, and then the program starts to decline. And that's what happens in nonprofits. And sadly, that's what I'm seeing is going to happen in the Trump presidency. And if the Trump presidency is run like Strive was in the year 2000, then I see what's going to happen to America is going to be a country that won't be great. It'll be a country that'll be starting a further state of decline. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.